What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgates podcast as part of the Man Cave podcast. Dan here with you as always. A big thanks for tuning in here. And on this episode of the pod, we got a couple things we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about Hall of Fame and that, but we lead it off. We're going to talk a little Josh Jacobs and his comments that he said the other day on Radio Row, and he was pretty open, and his comments spread like fire across social media and the internet. So that's where I want to lead things off with this episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate podcast as part of the Man Cave podcast. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Man Cave podcast, or if you just want Packers talk all the time, well, you could do that with the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate podcast too. And we're up on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. So with that being said, so what did Josh Jacobs, if you don't know what he said, he told 97.3 The Game on Radio Row on Wednesday when he was asked, are you a piece away? And he said, I think we need 3. But then he talked about the wide receiver group, and he thinks the Packers need a number 1. This was the quote. We've got a really young group of receivers. All can be really, really, really special. But I think personally, we need a guy that's proven to be a number 1 already. Somebody that we know is going to be a little bit more consistent. So that, got Dontavian Wicks retweeting that with some laughing emojis and a thumbs down emoji. And it's got a lot of people talking. Now, the number 1 receiver debate for Green Bay has been going on since last year, the beginning of this offseason, beginning of this season, do they need a number 1? Do they not need a number 1? You had some saying they don't need a number 1 so they can spread the ball around. Some saying they still need a number 1, to kind of target and a go-to guy sort of thing. And, we're back at the same debate here. My opinion on this, just to cut right to it, my opinion on this is, and I've said this before many times, I do think they need a number 1, but I don't define a number 1 wide receiver like somebody who's necessarily going to be your leading receiver, going to get you 1,600 yards and double-digit touchdowns and such. How I view a number 1 receiver, whether it's a tight end or a receiver, is, okay, it's 4th and 1, 4th and 2. You need to pick up this first down, or you need to extend a drive, or you need to get a touchdown here. We're going to draw up a play for this guy, and you're confident he's going to get you the ball. A guy that can run the proper route. A guy that, is going to come through in the clutch. And that's how I view number 1s is for those moments. And I think part of it too is, and Mike Wall, former Packers offensive lineman, had a great tweet about this, and he does a fantastic job breaking down film, watching film, and all that stuff. So he had said he didn't think it was necessarily, a mention of all the drops, which the Packers receivers had a lot of drops this year, but it was more towards, guys running the right routes, running crisp routes, and helping out the quarterback that way. And I do agree. I think that's part of the issue here. And you look at the individual performances, Christian Watson, he's probably going to be missing a big chunk of next year. So you're going to need to fill that hole. Romeo Doubs suffered a couple of concussions, had the suspension. What's his role going to be like? Jaden Reed, I think, is so super talented that, he had some drop issues. But then you're looking at, okay, where was he kind of in the second half? Dontavian Wicks led the league in drop rate. Guy is really explosive coming off the line of scrimmage. Can create separation that way, but had issues with drops. Tucker Kraft, you'd like to see him involved more too. But I think this is, Ted Thompson did a fantastic job when he was general manager, and with the wide receivers, there was always a next guy in waiting to take over that number 1 spot. And it was always like a succession. And the new guys coming in, learned from those veterans. You start with Driver, Jennings comes in, then Jennings takes over the number 1 spot. You had Jordy Nelson, James Jones, kind of learning underneath him. Then it was Jordy Nelson's turn. Then you had Randall Cobb and Devontae Adams under him. Then it was like Cobb and Devontae's turn. You always had the next guy waiting. And after Devontae, that pool was depleted. They did draft MVS, Equanimeous St. Brown, and Jamon Moore. Those guys didn't pan out. And then all of a sudden, you're in a situation where, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs entering their second year are your veterans. And they didn't weren't a part of that system, that tree, if you will, of like, okay, learn the ropes this way. This is how you practice. This is how you prepare. All that sort of stuff. They weren't able to be in that. And I think that's part of the issue here is that there was so much on the plate for some of these younger receivers that they were asked to do a lot right away. And some can do that, but not everybody's a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase in that situation. So I do think this group would benefit from a veteran wide receiver, whether it is a Devontae Adams type. And Josh Jacobs mentioned he's been talking to him too. I think Devontae Adams would be a perfect fit because he is somebody who is familiar with that offense. He is somebody who can mold these minds and help out these younger receivers. And he's a guy that I think you can trust in clutch situations. Got to pick up a first down, got to move the chains, just got to get something going. He's a guy that you throw that ball to, you can have all the trust in the world with. And that's what this receiver group needs. That, in my opinion, this is what that receiver group needs. I don't want a guy to come in and necessarily take away targets from a Tucker Kraft or a Jaden Reed or stunt the growth of a Dontavian Wicks. You know, if they bring in a T. Higgins or a Garrett Wilson, that's awesome. They're super talented players. But they're going to also cost a lot. And if Devontae is a free agent or they can work a trade and restructure with the contract, I think somebody like him, bring him in for a couple years, would do a boatload of good for this receiving group. But I've got no problem with Josh Jacobs going out there and publicly saying this is what we need. I don't think he was calling out his receivers. I just think he was like, hey, if we want to be Super Bowl champions and we want to be in this position, this is what we got to do. And we got to be better on offense. I think everybody in the world knows they got to have better play from their receivers. And I think, you know, you have that proper stuff. And for the route running part, you know, that's something as fans, we don't necessarily always pay attention to when we watch the game. If we see a bad throw, we see a tight throw or an overthrow or an underthrow, we point the blame a lot to the quarterback. And sometimes maybe we have to figure out, like, okay, did that receiver run the route the right depth? Was he too long? Was he too short? Did he cut in too quick or too late? You know, there's that stuff that we don't necessarily know. And I think that's where Josh Jacobs was going with this thing is like, there's talent in this room. There's no question about it. But I think we can be better if we got a veteran that comes in and is kind of that guy that, you know, we get consistency from. You look at the good teams out there, Kansas City has that with Travis Kelce. The Philadelphia Eagles have that with an A.J. Brown or a Devontae Smith, if you will. You know, you got Equanimeous St. Brown, you got a Justin Jefferson and such. So teams have that. Good teams have that. And I don't want Green Bay to necessarily get in a situation where they're just targeting one guy all the time. That's not what we're getting at. But again, it's that guy that would help these younger receivers make their jobs maybe a little bit easier too, but also just that confidence factor. Like, okay, we need a play. This is the guy that's going to do it. You know, you look at the Malik Heath catch at the end of the Philadelphia playoff game where it was out of bounds. Maybe a guy like Devontae does that route a little bit different, a little bit more crisp. He stays in bounds. Small differences like that. All right, I want to take a quick break here, and we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame coming up after these quick words. You know, for me, for Sharpe, obviously I was a kid when he was playing, but he is probably my first, how do I want to say this? Like the first really good football player, really good athlete that I kind of knew about as a kid, if that makes sense. Like when you're a kid and you start to follow along with sports and you're like, oh, I know who that player is. Like Sharpe was one of the first. I don't know if I'd say he was the first, but he was definitely one of the first ones. I mean, I still have a picture, and I posted it up on Facebook and Twitter. I remember back in the day, and they still do it, but it's different now. But you'd get the plastic helmets, the pads. I don't even think they do the pads. They don't, because I know Hudson didn't get pads. But back in the day, you could get a plastic helmet, some shoulder pads, football pants, and a jersey all in a box. And mine, it didn't have the name on the back, but it was 84. was a white one in 84. I think it was like the name was Hutch. It was 84. And I mean, it was Sharpe. But I remember as a kid, I remember as a kid, I always wanted a jersey with a name on the back. That was like my thing. Like I just wanted one. I wanted one with the name on my back. And I remember taking that shirt and cutting out a piece of paper, and in my crappy, really bad handwriting as, gosh, I don't know, second grade, first grade, whatever it was, and writing Sharpe on there in green marker, and then taking glue, Elmer's glue, and gluing it on the back of that jersey above the 84 just because I wanted the name on the back. I remember doing it. I wish I still had that shirt. I wish I still had that. But Sharpe was definitely one of the, easily one of my very first players, that you knew about. Like you knew they were good. You know what I mean? Like White is up there for me too, because I was trying to think back to when I was a little kid, and trying to think about those players that really got me into sports. Like who is a player? And this is where I want to kind of throw it back to all of you and give me a player. But who is like a player that when you think back to when you were a youngster, when you were a kid growing up, and that was a player that maybe sucked you in and got you to really like sports? Like we know the teams in that, right? But was there a player? Maybe you always pretended to be at recess or in the backyard, playing with your friends or family or whatever, like, oh, I'm going to be this guy. Like Sharpe was up there for me, and I was trying to think, I had Reggie White was up there for me because, when I was in Boy Scouts, I had the Pinewood Derby. I had a Packer car. And then you get stickers to put like the number on there, and mine was 92 for White. So Reggie White was up there. I remember my first player tee was from Kmart. I don't know why I remember this stuff, but I do. My first player tee was a Reggie White one. And then finally my first jersey was a Shaq Orlando Magic one, and I still have that jersey. Not even close to fitting me, but that one's hanging up on the wall. My very first actual jersey. That one's hanging up in the wall in the man cave. But I don't know why. I was like, and I think that's with Sharpe getting into the Hall, it kind of got me going down memory lane a little bit and thinking about some of the players, whether it was baseball or football or basketball, that were like the very first ones that I can remember vividly watching and just kind of like knowing, okay, that's a good player, or that's the best player of my favorite team. And Sharpe is definitely up there. I'd throw White in there, the Favre, O'Neal for my basketball. I mean, baseball was like Griffey and Frank Thomas. I was a big Hurt fan, Frank Thomas, as a kid. No idea why. I don't know why. I don't know why I gravitated towards Frank Thomas and the White Sox, but I had a White Sox hat as a kid. So I'm not quite sure why I did. I mean, again, it probably was just because he was the big Hurt and he was all over the place as a kid growing up. And, Brewers weren't that good, and they didn't really have any good players when I was a kid and such. But Packers now have 29 primary Hall of Famers. We use the word primary because they've got other players who, spent a hot minute in Green Bay. But for all accounting purposes, 29 primary players now in the Hall of Fame, 3 short of the Bears, who have 32. Packers could have had 30 last night if they would have put Mike Holmgren in. And the thing is like Mike Holmgren was the only finalist as a coach. And we talked about it all week. The voting process is harder now. I mean, they've got harder. Basically, you got to get 80% of the votes and such. And Holmgren didn't get that, obviously. And it's, he was the only coach in that category, but it's combined with the seniors and the contributors. And I would not count on Holmgren getting in next year because some guy named Bill Belichick is going to be eligible. So if Bill's eligible, you know Bill's getting in. So that pushes Holmgren down a little bit, along with Shanahan, along with Coughlin. So that's the bummer. Yeah, obviously we're a little bit more probably personal with it and a little bit of a homer part of it. But, I mean, you look at it and it's like we might have to, at bare minimum, wait a couple more years for Holmgren to potentially get in. I still feel like Mike Holmgren should get in. He doesn't have as many titles as Mike Shanahan or Tom Coughlin, but I think you have to look at the other things that he has done to affect the game, and that's mold these other coaches. I mean, to mold a guy like Andy Reid, to mold these players like a Favre and all that. There's more to it, in my opinion. There's more to that. So, but we know Super Bowl titles are the number one thing. That's why I believe Marty Schottenheimer's not in it, or Dan Reeves is not in it. They got a bunch of wins, but they're not in it because they don't have titles as head coaches. But you look at, obviously the big one last night too was Eli did not get in. Eli Manning did not get in. And with the tighter rules, I don't think he gets in next year either. You got some first time eligible players next year that I don't think Eli is even going to get in next year, because you got Drew Brees who's eligible. You've got Larry Fitzgerald who's eligible. I think those are two locks for first-time eligible Hall of Famers player-wise. Easily two locks. And then you're going to have the debate. You got Phillip Rivers. He's eligible. Jason Witten's eligible. I don't think he's going to get in first time. Frank Gore, I think, is going to get in. I don't know if it'll be first time. You got Greg Olson that's listed in there too. So, I mean, you've got some really, really good players coming in. And I don't think it's going to be, I don't think Eli's going to get in next year either. But for me, for that 2026 class, I think the locks are easily Larry Fitzgerald and Drew Brees. Frank Gore, I think, is going to get in. Longevity, numbers are up there. I just don't know if it'll be the first one. But good to see Sharpe in it. The video's out. You kind of, they do it a little bit differently. They surprise him with, like a teammate or somebody like that surprises him. And of course, you kind of want, the video wasn't released yet right away yesterday. It was after the fact. But you kind of figured it was going to be his brother, and it was Shannon Sharpe that surprised him and told him that he was going to be in the Hall of Fame. And because Eli doesn't get in, Shannon and Sterling are now right now the only brothers in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's got to be so cool. That's got to be so dang cool. Like, I'm an only child, but that's got to be so cool to know both you and your brother are going to be immortalized in the same Hall of Fame for the rest of time. I mean, that has got to be so dang cool. I was thinking about that. I'm like, man, one, it's cool to just get in there and to be immortalized, to have your name there forever, for generations to come, to see that. And now it's you and your brother in that same hall where the busts talk for forever. Gosh, that's so cool. And Sharpe, you look at it, and I mean, we've talked about his numbers before and such, but you look at it, I think what the biggest thing that stands out to me, you can look at the amount of catches. He had 108 first time, and that's ever since been just demolished, that record and such. But you look at what he did, and I think you factor in, okay, he didn't start off with Favre. You can make the argument he didn't really even have prime Favre when he did have him out there. And yet he was still putting up these numbers when teams were coming in and saying, okay, Sterling Sharpe is the only threat they've got on offense. Let's try to slow him down. Let's try to stop him. And he still went out there and did his thing. And in an era where he was putting up numbers that rivaled or even bested the likes of a Jerry Rice. I mean, the other receivers that were in that era that are in the Hall of Fame, and Sharpe was better than some of those guys. A lot of those guys. And you factor in the team that Sharpe played on compared to some of the other Hall of Famers. I mean, and this is not to take away anything from Rice, but Rice being with the 49ers, better quarterback play, better team overall. Irvin, better team overall. Tim Brown with the Raiders. Andre Reed had Jim Kelly and such. You know, and for Sterling Sharpe to put up those numbers that he did is absolutely nuts, and it's crazy. And it just, the thing that just stinks for him, obviously, is the career's short, and he fell short of getting a Super Bowl a couple years too short because of that neck injury. But you look at his 7-year career, and the man never missed a game. He never missed a game in his 7 years. 112 games played, 112 games started. And his career ends because of a neck injury, even though he never missed a single game. That, for a wide receiver, too, is pretty dang remarkable. You know, 3-time All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler when the Pro Bowl actually meant something. Dude got MVP votes in 92 and 93. Offensive Player of the Year votes in those same years. He was an electric, dynamic wide receiver on a not great team, and he was still able to get his. He was still able to put up those numbers. Whether it was a deep threat, I mean, he could go across the middle in that, but man, I can still remember watching a lot of his clips and highlights as a youngster growing up. And it's going to be so flippin' cool. It's going to be so cool to see the next time when it does happen. I don't know when they're going to do it and such, but to see Sterling Sharpe's name on that Lambeau Field facade, you know, when he gets his Hall of Fame ring at a game this year, and they unveil his name next to the likes of all these other Hall of Famers up there, the Leroy Butlers, the Favres, the Whites, the Woodsons, the Stars, the Nitschkes, the Hudsons, and then now it's going to be Sterling Sharpe's. Like that to me, I think is going to, like, okay, that's cool, because now I'm going to go back down memory lane in that. So that's cool. That's so dang cool. Good for Sterling too. I think, again, I didn't think it was going to happen how many years ago. Whenever we had that discussion, like, who's the next Packer to get in? You know, it was like, not that long ago, it was like, it's got to be Jerry. Jerry Kramer needs to get in. He deserves to get in. And then when Jerry finally got in, it was like, it's got to be Leroy. Butler's got to be the guy. And I think we all thought Sterling, if he would have just played longer, if he would have been able to play longer, he would be in. And it was just that mindset that was kind of out there, too, for a lot of players. If you had shorter careers outside of Gale Sayers, you probably weren't going to get in the Hall of Fame. And then it started to change. The voters had a different mindset. They started to look at it differently, and rightfully so. They're like, no. If you were good, if you were the best at your position, and you know you had a little bit of a shorter career, that doesn't necessarily matter as much anymore. You see the Patrick Willis getting in with a short career. I'm a little surprised Luke Kuechly's not in yet, to be honest with you. If Patrick Willis is already in. But they changed that mindset, and that allowed guys like Sterling Sharpe, Tony Boselli, Terrell Davis, those guys to get in whose careers were cut short because of injuries suffered play in the game. There's no question about it. Sterling Sharpe was easily on a Hall of Fame path. And good to see that he finally gets in. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm not to that situation, but all these years going through Sterling's mind, playing at a high level, then finding out you got to call it a career. 2 years later, your team goes on to win the Super Bowl without you. You know, your brother has all the success, winning some Super Bowls, getting into the Hall of Fame, and just going through the what ifs. What if I didn't get hurt? Would I have a ring? Would I already have a gold jacket? To go through that for as long as he did, now finally getting in, it's like, God, that's going to be a good feeling for him, and good for him too. All right, that is going to do it for us on this episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate Podcast as part of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to both the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate Podcast and the Man Cave Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. If you could, give us a nice follow and a positive review as well so others can find the podcast. Till next time, I'm Dan Casper, and we'll talk to you later.